When we think of modal harmony, many of us think of using the pitches of a diatonic mode to build a chord progression. Here's an example from Daniel Yellenberger's book, Music at the Beginning of the 19th Century. This is obviously modal because it doesn't use any leading tones and because it only uses the pitches of the Dorian mode. But it's not very interesting. Music becomes more interesting when it uses pitches from different modes, switching back and forth. This is possible without using any chromatic pitches. For example, in the 1960s, the Beatles emphasized tonal scale degrees for some of their chords and modal scale degrees for others. Let me explain what I mean. Many music theorists have considered 1, 4, and 5 to be the most important chords in a key. For example, George Chadwick in the 19th century called these chords principal chords. He called 2, 3, and 6 secondary chords. In the 20th century, Walter Piston changed these labels. He used the term secondary to refer to secondary dominants, so he needed new terms to refer to the diatonic chords. He used the term tonal to refer to chords built on 1, 4, and 5 in a major key, and the term modal to refer to chords built on 3 and 6. While I would classify 2 as a modal scale degree, Piston didn't. He saw a 2 as a substitute for a 4 chord, a tonal chord. Still, I like Piston's terms because they describe what the chords actually sound like. When you're in a major key and you're using 2, 3, or 6, it sounds like you're in natural minor, a modal key. The Beatles took advantage of this to give their ballads a melancholy kind of modal sound, even though they were often in major keys. Here's a little piece I cooked up that imitates the Beatles' early style. Note that the beginning of the piece uses chords based only on minor 2, minor 6, and minor 3. The chords on the tonal scale degrees appear as the end of the first section approaches. They are used to lead into the cadence. The Beatles would often use dominant seventh chords to lead strongly into the next section of a song. We used an E7, a secondary dominant at the end of the first section. We also put a G7 at the end of the second section. This leads back to the beginning of the song. In a common practice song, this would make the G7 leading back to C, but this isn't a common practice song. Since the opening of the song emphasizes chords built on modal scale degrees, the G7 leads to a D minor chord instead. To my ear, this works just fine, even though the G7's leading to a supertonic chord rather than a tonic. Variety of mode can also be achieved through modulation. Gustav Holst uses a number of different modes in Jupiter from the planets. Jupiter begins with a busy background figuration based on a pentatonic scale. I would guess that this is probably a minor pentatonic, and as is typical of pentatonic, it has 2 minor third gaps, where F and B would be if this were an A minor scale. A theme comes in that's actually in A minor, in Aeolian, in measure 6. Given the busyness of the accompaniment, I would call this pan-pentatonic, meaning that the overall effect is like hearing all the pentatonic pitches at once, like a pentatonic cluster. Using the pentatonic texture to accompany the melody makes it sound different than if it had been accompanied by a similar but pan-diatonic texture, which in this case would have used all the pitches of an Aeolian scale. The pan-pentatonic texture in the original colors all of the music, including the melody, which now sounds like pentatonic with PNs, non-chord tones. The pan-diatonic version sounds like all natural minor to me, making it sound darker than the original. There's a similar effect at the beginning of Stravinsky's Petrushka. The accompanying texture this time has 4 notes of a pentatonic scale, D, E, G, and A. The 5th note of the pentatonic scale, the B, appears in measure 5. Shortly after that, a 6th pitch, a C sharp, appears. So at that point, Stravinsky's using 6 of the 7 notes of a D major scale. So at that point, it should just sound like a major scale. But to me, it doesn't. It sounds like some kind of super bright pentatonic. Leaving out just the one note, the F sharp, makes the passage and the scale it's built on sound different. To me, a D major scale sounds average, and the Stravinsky scale sounds somehow mysterious and beautiful. Next, Holst introduced a descending figure and a fanfare motive in G mixolydian. The harmony here is static, a G chord with both a 4th and a 5th, a G sus4 chord. What I think of as the second real theme enters in E Dorian at rehearsal number 3. The harmonies are diatonic to the Dorian mode, except for a G sharp passing tone in the middle of the theme and an A minor chord that sets up the final cadence. G mixolydian returns at score number 5 with the 3rd theme. This is harmonized very simply with major 1s, subtonic 7s, and minor 5s. This may look like a simple common practice harmonization, but it doesn't sound like it. It sounds modal because there are no leading tones. The middle section of the piece, the hymn-like section, appears at first glance to be in E-flat major, but to my ear, it sounds modal. I think the melody itself is essentially pentatonic. There are prominent minor 3rd gaps. Most of the time, the D is missing. The A-flat's missing altogether. When the D does appear, it's a non-pentatonic tone, a PN. In addition, Holst harmonizes the melody as if it were modal. Look at the cadences. The first one is a major 5 to a minor 6, and then a minor 2 to a major 1, and then a major 1 to a major 4, and then a half cadence, and then a major 5 to a minor 6, and then a minor 2 to a major 1. This kind of thing goes on throughout the section. I can't find a single authentic cadence. So Holst has mixed a number of modes throughout the movement, giving it variety and color. So far, all the chords have been diatonic. What about chromatic chords? A nice example of Holst's use of chromaticism begins in measure 37. Here Holst repeats the fanfare theme harmonized with a kind of French sixth chord. It's based on tonic, G at this point, so it doesn't resolve as it would in common practice music. It resolves to an F sharp chord, which ends up leading through a B minor 7 to an E major chord, which is the key of the second theme. I think that Holst is using the French sixth here as a kind of whole tone chord. The chord contains 4 of the 6 pitches of the G whole tone scale. Many times, composers will create a kind of modal chromaticism by borrowing chords from other modes. This will change the mood of the piece for just an instant. Here's an example from early 20th century composer Alfredo Casella. Notice that the piece starts out in D Dorian. Casella emphasizes the Dorian aspect of the work by alternating 2 chords, a minor 1 and a major 4/6/4. The minor 1 establishes the tonic. The major 4 chord expresses the Dorianness of the piece because it stresses the raised 6th scale degree, Dorian's signature pitch. Casella adds dissonance and emphasis at the cadence by borrowing a major flat 2 chord from Phrygian and a melodic lowered 5th scale degree from Locrian right at the end of the section. Casella's second theme is still in D, but has changed mode to Lydian. He uses another 4 chord, but this time it's diminished because it's a sharp 4. He uses a very strange chord as a kind of a dominant at the cadence. I'm not sure what Casella was thinking, but it looks to me like a 9th chord on dominant built using an octatonic scale. In any case, it sets up a cadence on D, with the dominant note and without a leading tone. Antonin Dvorak was perhaps the master of mixing styles of harmonization. We'll talk about his music next time.